Welcome everyone to another Black Desert video. So today I wanted to share some tips on how to maximize your damage, whether you're a PvEer or a PvPer. And what brought this up was one of my friends returned to the game recently and we played together from other MMOs. So as we all know, Elder Scrolls Online or Final Fantasy is a little bit different to Black Desert in terms of, combat and everything. And so whether you're a beginner or not, I wanted to share some tips on things that you could do and things that people would normally forget to do before going out to grind or PvP. So some of these might be obvious to veteran players, but I do actually believe these are important. So I think I'll share all of these with you guys. With that said, first thing I would recommend is using your food buff. And whether you use a simple cron meal for PvE or an exquisite for PvP or, seafood for life skilling, make sure to always be using one of these. Back in the day, a little story was we used to actually do food rotations, which means, these thingies where it had like a 30-minute cooldown and a 90-minute duration. We had to cycle through four or more different foods on cooldown to get all the buffs that cron meals used to give. And nowadays it's so simple. So it's something that everyone should at least consider. And simple cron meals are more for the PvE side. Exquisites are more used on PvP. With that said, that's not exclusively what it's for, depending on where you're grinding, but as a general consensus by most people, that's what it's for the most part used for, simply because AP against monsters is better for grinding, and all the other stuff is more PvP orientated. So the next thing I would recommend is, I have a list over here: Elixirs, Draughts, and Perfumes. So we talked about this in another video that I did, and back in the day, remember popping all of these buffs one by one? Now we have Harmony Draughts. It's basically all in one, and it's a little bit more expensive. Admittedly, we talk about that in more detail in another video on price comparisons. But for everyone else who just wants to make everything easy, if you're a PvPer, just use the Harmony Draft for humans. And if you're grinding, use like the Kama Sylvia or Demi-Human or just the default harmonies. I will say, depending on the price on your server, these are the default ones. You turn the default harmonies into like a human, demi-human, Kama Sylvian one. And the species damage is actually a little bit better because you take less damage and, damage from monsters minus 10%. And of course, you do the species damage. So it is generally worth it to use a species one, even if you're grinding in a spot just for the damage taken from monsters minus 10%. But for the most part, always use a harmony. I know it's expensive, but also if you're grinding in a lower area spot, you probably have things like frenzy elixirs or magical beast elixirs or something like that, right? And these are, I would say, useful even in PvP, or no, this one is a PvE exclusive one, the Corruption. The Beast, and what is the pink one? I think it's a Giant Draft. Those could be used for like lower end grind spots or, alternatives if you are not willing to spend that much on it. But I also think that Perfumes are, obviously considered the best in slot for the Perfumed ones. Just gives you the most offensive stats. And it is also very expensive. So I don't expect people to use these on regular, but in PvP, I do see it. High-end grinding, you also do use it, but mid-tier, maybe not so much. The next thing I want to talk about is Villa Scrolls. Now, you can get this in multiple ways. One, going to the actual villa and then buying an invitation. Two is getting a tent. And whether you have the paid version or the, the one you get in-game, it almost functions similarly. So let me show you how it works. If you have the paid tent, you can get the villa buffs. I believe even the free one you can too. It's just a few other things you cannot get, which I don't quite remember off the top of my head. But for the most part, the things you want are to be able to buy villa buffs, which are these. And back in the day, I know that this sounds like an old-time player, but these things right here, just in case all of you wondered what this was on the map, yeah, these are villas. There's an NPC over here. You would pay like 10 million silver and in bars and all this stuff. And then they would give you a 1-week invitation. That invitation would allow you to buy basically the equivalent of villa buffs over here. So this is something I always think is worth it. Even if you're only grinding for an hour and just, you know, spending 1 million silver, the amount of stats that it gives is actually a lot better, simply because it'll allow you to clear faster, get more trash loot, and I can assure you that you will make this 1 million back in your grind hour no matter what. The next thing I want to talk about is church buffs. You can actually buy them from the shop right here. These are the equivalents. So basically all AP, all accuracy, DR, HP, and then combat XP and skill XP. It's a little bit more expensive to buy it from the tent over here, but like, let's be real, it's not that much more. The equivalent of doing it back before tents were available, or that was not an option in the tent on launch, you would have to buy the equivalent from like the church vendor. And if you don't know how to find it, it's essentially the church buff option. You hit the magnifying glass silver and call it church buffs, because usually the person is in the equivalent of a church or something. So yeah, these are essentially the same thing, but a little bit cheaper if you buy it directly there instead of a tent. It's convenience. So that's also a good thing. The reason why we're also in Heidel is because everything that's important for grinding and or PvP is also here. The next thing I want to talk about is the Carolin buff. This is something that's a little bit niche to Heidel, but over here, this NPC, what she does is you could trade energy for a buff, and I'll just buy it to show you. So this thing right here, it's critical hit damage plus 10%, always good. So whether you're doing like boss shrines, PvP, or, you know, even PvE, if you can get there fast enough, it's an extra 30 minutes of a buff that I think is very useful to have, and you only pay energy for it. So I think that's really good. But it's only exclusively in Heidel, so that's one of those things I wish they would add to other vendors in towns and maybe make it unique. Like, let's say, you know, Heidel gives the crit damage, Velia could give like attack damage or some sort of defensive, but make it so like all towns give something unique or the same thing. I don't care. Just make it, you know, more diverse, I guess. And so the next thing I want to talk about is furniture buffs. And as we all know, just by playing the game, you probably have a bunch of all these little furniture thingies that are like, oh, you just get all these things, and then you know how it gives you some random stat or even some other thing. Let's see, where did I put them? Yeah, all of these things from events that you could also buy from the central market. And let me show you how to do that as well. I believe it is under furniture, and yeah, like one of these. So essentially, if the ones that are important are the ones that give offensive damage, so like all AP, maybe more health depending on what you're doing, but for the most part, just generally more damage is the way to go. Those are the ones that are valuable. So just take a look at all of these and see what they do. And I actually thought that these statues were going to be hard capped at like 3 billion, but apparently they're going up, but they're sitting at minimum. So I think these are actually worth investing into, even for 1 billion silver. It's like plus 15 AP. That's like plus 15 gear score for in, you know, 2 hours. So for your grinding, that's always improving. And so that's something you should always try to add to your rotation before you start grinding. I know that's one that's forgettable. Even for me, sometimes I'm just like, oh, I forgot it. I'm already at the grind spot. Do I want to go back? No. So yeah, that's one of those things that I need to get into the habit of doing myself, but it is actually a lot of damage. So the next thing, this is more tailored toward newer players, because if you're a veteran player, you probably have this on lock no matter what class you're playing, is skill add-ons. And as we all know, some people don't know how to build the skill add-ons, or you have things separately for PvE, PvP. That's what all these presets are for. So you can play Awakening, Succession, PvE, and PvP. I assume that's why they have at least 4. So here's some tips that I can give you guys. No matter what class you play, obviously every class is built different, but some like general tips I can give you guys are these. Look at the skills that do, for the most part, the most damage, right? And look at the cooldown. So for example, Shattering Darkness is on a 9-second cooldown, but the skill effect is like, I try to put things that are like 12 seconds on it. So in theory, you want to have as close to, if not 100% uptime on everything when you're grinding, because this is a fast-paced game. You should be chaining skills back to back and like doing all your abilities. You should try to keep all these on like general uptime 100%. So for example, this one, 3-second cooldown, everything is at least 5 seconds. 9-second cooldown here, 10-second buffs, and so on and so on. So you like make sure that when the cooldown for these abilities are up, you pop it again, and then you get the buffs again. So I know that's a little bit tricky for newer players to think about, because you have to actually look at everything and you just can't, like, you know, pick things. But yeah, that's kind of how you min-max it. Like, yeah, you can pick something that's like a 30-second and might be good, but you kind of just want to match up cooldown timers as a collective. So Dark Nebula, 7-second cooldown. I try to line up with a 7-second on here, and then that one's just a bonus. So yeah, whether you play Awakening or Succession, it doesn't matter what class you do. Just try to, you know, pick skills that are high damage, or give, like, you know, something that you would use normally in your rotation, and try to keep your buff up times up to 100%. And I can guarantee you will improve your grinding and or PvP a lot faster. The next thing I want to talk about is a horse buff. Now, this is something that I would admit is a little bit more on the like lower priority, because hold on, let me show you. Okay, so the horse buff, and what I mean by this is these Krogdalo pieces, and you can get them multiple ways. You can grind it out yourself, you can, and then make it, or you can just buy them. Sometimes they sit on the market, sometimes they don't. It just kind of depends on where your server is at. The best place to get all of these is probably somewhere in Kama Sylvia. Just do your daily quest. If you're going for like infinite potions or something, you'll probably get a lot of the wind or fragments, and they look like this, like these colored fragments. Wind one is for, you know, wind gear. Stone is for the earth one, or earth one for defensive, and water is for, I believe that one is like resources, but I don't know. Either way, the one you want to get as high priority is probably the wind one, simply because this one just gives HP or AP. So here's how it works. You do your little roar thingy, and you see how we just got the wind's roar buff. 5 AP for 1 hour. So try to pop that before you grind. And PvP. The thing is, if you die in PvP, the buff resets, or like that, it gets negated. So you have to repop this every time for PvP. But if you are just playing for PvE, you shouldn't be dying, and this should give you an indicator of like your grind hour. So another thing you guys could do is, I guess nowadays this is more of like a little, it is RNG a little bit, but if you have the Krogdalo Sanctuary, this item right here, essentially it's a transportable stable, so you can have all your 3 horses, and then if you have all 3, the things, you could have the different Krogdalos. However, this cooldown right here is like every 5 minutes, so that means you can't use this one and then swap to your other horse and then pop it instantly. It's a 5-minute cooldown. However, it is a party buff. That means if you have multiple people in your party and they all have the different Krogdalo sets, they do stack. So to give you an idea, yeah, that's how it works. And I will admit, it's not a huge buff, but like 5 AP is 5 AP. And I think this is something that I would recommend people to invest into eventually. It's probably, if you were to make it yourself, probably, let's say like a 10 bill investment, just because I don't know the market price for all of your things. But if you're grinding it out yourself and then crafting and enhancing, you're roughly about 10 billion. The next thing I want to talk about is artifacts and lightstones. This is actually a big thing that a lot of people just kind of pick random things, and I know some newer players that are like, oh, I don't want to invest into artifacts and lightstones simply because like you have gear to upgrade. And I do agree with that to an extent. It's like, obviously your main gear is probably higher priority than artifacts and lightstones. With that said, it is probably a good idea to invest in all that. We'll talk about crystals in a second, by the way. So if you are a PvEer, know that, you know, like species damage is always a thing. Investing into Kabua's artifacts will pay itself off eventually. Like, it's just more damage and then species damage. So like if you are in Kama Sylvia, or if you're fighting things against demi-humans, it's just more damage. All-out attack is, I would consider, arguably the best overall. With that said, I do think you do need a little bit of gear before swapping to it, or you play a class with a lot of iframes and you are, for the most part, well off and you know what you're doing. So the reason why here is all-out attack. It does give the most offensive stats, but it's kind of like a glass cannon trade-off where you lose DR and evasion. So if you don't want to use it, there are a lot of other options, species damage being one of them. I actually had some other ones, like, where is it? If you want, like, all magic AP with something else, I believe there's, like, other things where it's, like, back attack damage or more just general damage with no downsides, but it's not as strong. So, yeah, there's a lot of different combinations I had. And if you are the kind of player that likes playing defensively, there are new artifacts that people use nowadays for all DR and all evasion. Admittedly, these are probably a little bit difficult to get right now because these are endgame, like really endgame. And so like you kind of have to grind Olin's 2 or Ash Forest Dekia 2 for these, which is kind of annoying actually. I've been doing it myself, and these are like stupid low drop rates. Either way, another story. But yeah, these are defensive options as well. These are PvE artifacts. But if you're a beginner, here's what I would recommend to everyone else, whether you're a beginner or you just don't want to spend silver on Kabuas. There's artifacts that give extra AP against monsters. That's straight up just more damage and is basically free. I've had so many of these, and you know, they just kind of drop. You'll get them just by playing the game normally. So when in doubt, just add extra AP against monsters if you are a PvEer. If you are PvPing, you could add like specific type of damage. So if you're a Dark Knight, you do magic damage. If you're like a warrior, you're probably doing melee damage. So depending on your class, just get the effect AP, and it's equivalent to basically 1-to-1 AP, I think. Maybe a little bit less, but for the most part, consider it a 1-to-1. If you're defensive, all DR, all evasion, HP. I would say these HP ones are kind of bad. Same with all of these. So just go more damage or straight up defensive. Don't mess with the other ones. They're kind of dated at this point. But yeah, this is what I use for PvP. Extra damage to humans. And then just, you know, I also have accuracy artifacts on these. I might switch these up for defensives when I get them, but accuracy is always nice and more human damage. So we want to talk about crystals next. This is something that a lot of people will get into eventually, and admittedly, it is kind of a silver sink. So I completely understand when people are like, I just want to upgrade my gear first. But trust me when I say a good set of crystals will actually get you really far. And this is what I have. I have a separate video that's like, what, 30 plus minutes, but we go over every single one of these. It's PvE, PvP, and life skills, and, you know, combat XP. So if you want to watch that, I'll leave a link in the description to that as well. It's kind of a long video, but I talk about it in detail. But just as a TLDR, this is what I use for most things. And, you know, like, it actually is pretty good. Like, extra AP against monsters plus 64, crit, accuracy, and all that stuff. So believe it or not, it does make a difference. It is worth the investment. And I also talked about alternatives for beginner players as well. So like, these are endgame crystals and some things you can get instead. So yeah, I'll leave a link in the description if you care. With that said, the last thing I want to talk about is the fairy. Now, back in the day, I would have said that one skill that we had called continuous care, I personally still to this day don't think people need a continuous care 5. Simply because, one, harmony drafts exist now, and you could just put it on your hotbar and pop it. So back in the day, we had all these blue elixirs, and let's be honest, no one is popping these one by one. So we had a fairy to auto use the items. So this is actually what I used to have set up. I have the fairy pop all my elixirs, and nowadays you just, you know, pop a harmony draft and it's equivalent, even if not better. Actually, it is better. But anyway, so a few things I would talk about with the fairy. Is it still worth min-maxing? The skills I would recommend as high priority is Miraculous Cheer. You want to get Miraculous Cheer 5 and 5 exclusively. The reason why is it drops the cooldown to 2 seconds. And whether you have infinite potions or not, if you look at these right here, 2-second cooldown for your health potion. That is high priority. 5 seconds on mana potion, less relevant because, you know, like, there are other ways to get it. However, PvP, PvE, you're going to want to have these popped on cooldown at all times, essentially. And so, yeah, that is why I think Miraculous Cheer is high priority. Feathery Steps is basically you can carry 125% of your total weight. And so if you don't want to spend more money on weight, this is a cheaper alternative in theory on average. And Continuous Care. So my thoughts on this one. I truly believe that most people will not need Continuous Care 5. And I would ask yourself, before you think about upgrading, ask yourself, what do you actually need? So Continuous Care 1 is 5 items, 8, 12, 16, and 20. I think your average person, if you have a Continuous Care 2, that is beyond good enough for like your average player. And even for me, I think that would be more than enough now that harmonies exist. So yeah, so ask yourself, what do you want to be popped on cooldown? And this is actually what I use. I still have this set up, but it's like, let's say you have a simple cron meal or something for your food buff that we talked about earlier. Pop that, it lasts for like a 2-hour thingy, and you probably don't even need to have this popped. The one you would really want are elixirs if you're doing that, but harmonies take up like, what is it? I think 15 slots on here, but you don't even need it. You could just put on your hotbar and then use it. And that's like essentially that. And then after that, one thing that I think would be nice is probably Perfumes. I mean, you could pop these every 20 minutes as well, but it's one of those things where it's nice to just have it auto popped, and then if you grind a lot, you just have your XP scrolls, whatever, if you want that. So, do I think continuous care is good? Yeah, it's very convenient. Do I think most people will need it? Not really. So, if I were to get it, just ask yourself how many items do you want selected and, autoed. And I think for a realistic number, continuous care like 2 is probably more than enough for most people. And then I had mine before harmonies existed, so that's why I have it, but I'm glad I did. Miraculous Cheer, high priority. Feathery Steps too. If you grind an hour and you don't have paid wait or anything, it's really nice to have. And then Continuous Care, less relevant nowadays, but it's also nice. And then the fourth one, really irrelevant. You could have anything else. And this is like a little bit off topic, but people have asked me, why do you have Morning Star? Because I like to have the fairy when it's nighttime. Like, as you all know, if you have grinded at nighttime or like when it's raining and it's dark, it's actually really dark. So, yeah, it's one of those things. You could buy a Tannis light from the vendor for like, what, 20 silver. It's not a big deal, but I just like to have mine toggled on and off permanently. So, yeah, it's mostly personal preference. Aside from Miraculous Cheer, that's basically mandatory. And then, yeah, get whatever you want. So, those are the tips I can give you to improve your damage, improve your grind, do more damage in PvP, and all that stuff. So, if I missed anything, feel free to add it in the comments. I just want to say thank you guys so much for watching. Before I head out, I do have a birthday code on screen somewhere, and be sure to use it by January 29th, and it's like free cron stones, mem frags, the loot scroll, and like one of those dice roll thingies. So if you're on PC, NA, and EU, check that code out. So thanks so much for watching. If you are new to your channel, would love to see you come back. Hit that subscribe button, and I'll see you tomorrow. Peace.